What is your worst experience with bad neighbors? The middle-aged, elephant man who lives above me. I can hear him masturbate. I never knew people moaned so loudly by themselves. He's an elementary school teacher, so, with everyone working from home, I've also heard him masturbate right after teaching a class, which adds to the repulsiveness. As a note, I'm all for neighbors making noise while having sex, but to moan so loudly while masturbating just seems excessive and creepy. He stomps around at all hours of the night. Most of the time, it sounds like he's directly above me while I'm trying to sleep. Oh, and he think he's the boss of our tiny apartment building, telling people to move their laundry/trash can/where to park/etc. Lived in an apartment building with little better than paper for walls. You could clearly hear the next door neighbors' conversations, them having sex, walking up the stairs, etc. For some reason they thought it would be totally awesome to install a surround sound system and affix the speakers to our shared wall. It was not awesome. It was so loud that it literally shook the wall, and we couldn't hear our own television unless we turned it up ridiculously loud in return. The neighbors did not respond kindly to our request that they place the speakers elsewhere, or at least turn the bass down. It ultimately ended with cops being called on them after the guy got pissed at being asked again to turn it down and started pounding on the wall and screaming about how he was going to fuck us up. They finally got evicted when he threatened someone at the management office on some other matter. Before he got evicted, though, we begged the office to let us move to a different apartment, couldn't afford the lease breaking fee to just leave, and they did let us move to another building. And our new neighbors had a parrot that never shut the fuck up, and a special needs child who would literally spend hours banging on their piano screaming/singing "My name is Amanda." What can one do in that situation except grin and bear it, I guess. Once our lease was up, I was so fucking glad to leave that apartment complex. Some noise is expected in apartment buildings. I've certainly lived in other apartments and was fine with the normal/expected amount of noise. But when there's zero sound insulation and you have neighbors that don't give a shit, it sucks pretty bad. I lived in a small building that housed 5 apartments years ago, and one day a Fred Durst lookalike moved in with his wife and daughter. I like to keep to myself, but I could hear them having trouble moving their things inside, so I offered to help. They seemed really nice that first day. I'll list off some of what happened in no particular order since it all jumbled together over the years with how common it was. Discount Fred Durst would play COD at all hours of the night completely shit-faced, which wouldn't bother me at all, but the walls were worse than paper and there wasn't a single night he didn't end up screeching racial slurs, and I don't mean sentences, I mean just the individual words screamed repeatedly. On more than a few nights he had enlightened moments, and in between the curses and insults I heard him scream things like "Why doesn't anyone like me?" which was fucking golden. Despite the last point, they would call in noise complaints every single month. I worked night shift and I would get annoying messages from the landlord about how I was apparently blasting music or having parties when I was working and no one was home. They would order food from 2 different places so they would have twice the chance of a fast order and just tell the other one to fuck off. You were too slow. One delivery woman heard my roommate and I in the living room close to the entryway after it happened one time, and she walked right up to our door and said, "Wow, that guy sure has a small penis." 2010s loved that lady. Multiple police visits over the years for Florida man tier craziness. One time I saw about 4 to 5 cops come in the entryway, and I guess from what I had heard his wife went downtown and assaulted another woman, and even though I assume people on scene were doing their due diligence, Fred called the cops to his own house and told them to go arrest her. Does my former upstairs landlord count? He was a 19-year-old Chinese guy whose father had bought him the $5 million house we were already living in the basement suite of when it was sold up front. Dude started periodically complaining that I wouldn't stop cooking spicy food or curry, despite the fact that I'm a white person who is a huge wimp with chilies. The most I had used at any point when he complained was a black bean soup large enough to feed an army with 3 dried chipotles tossed in. I caved and switched to making only white people food for a few weeks to make him shut up. He still complained about spicy food when I was, among other things, frying onions in butter to make scrambled eggs and cooking potato soup. I came to the conclusion that he was so rich and clueless he'd probably never lived within 100 feet of a kitchen in his life. Finally, having established that his definition of spicy food was literally any and all human food, he quote-unquote, told me that I should be eating my spicy food in restaurants instead of cooking it. He then illegally evicted me with 2 weeks' notice on the grounds that I wouldn't stop making curry. We literally spoke to a lawyer who told us we could fight it, but he genuinely had no idea what would possibly fucking happen in court, because at no point in human history has a Chinese person evicted a white person for frying onions because they're that racist against Indian people and also have never lived within 200 feet of a kitchen. Just straight up rednecks who wanted the full neighbor experience without putting in any effort themselves. It was like they'd moved from some hillbilly commune where you could just demand things of your neighbors. Every day when I got home from school, the 3 youngest kids would bang on our door until we gave them snacks. One of them, when denied snacks, came back and broke our glass door with a hammer. They turned the shared side yard, legally ours but shared because we weren't necessarily using it, into a lumberyard/playground where they dug a massive pit for mud wrestling. No bullshit there, mud wrestling. The second oldest kid, 6 in total, had an old A/C air handling unit in the backyard that he was allowed to hit with a sledgehammer when he got angry. He got angry often and at some pretty irregular hours. I ran into him at a bowling alley years after they moved away/got kicked out/went bankrupt. He had a tattoo across his chest that said Immortal Death in a black gradient. He also had giant scars all over his back, chest, and arms. He said he woke up in the middle of the highway on Halloween night, all cut up. Who knows if that's true, but if it could happen to anyone, he was the guy. A few more redneck activities because this comment is getting some attention. Lighting bottle rockets out of the tailpipe on their dad's truck. The youngest kid got stuck in the mud pit up to his head and they couldn't get him out for hours. On rainy nights they used to put these rusty cots in the front yard and sleep in the rain. That one didn't even register as redneck, felt more like an Addams Family thing to do. They somehow got their hands on what looked like municipal park playground equipment, one of which was a steel slide about 2 stories tall. One of the younger kids took a bike up to the top of it and tried to ride down, but fell over backwards and smacked his head on the metal steps a few times. The mom watched him do it and I specifically remember her saying he's gotta learn somehow after he fell. A bunch of things with my ding-dong neighbor. She had a large dog that hated my older, smaller dog. One day her dog ran into my yard and bit my dog. She did apologize for this one, did not happen again. Neighbor dumped her lawn clippings into my backyard. Had to ask her to stop and clean up her mess. She decided to build a fence. No survey. So I paid for a survey of my property. She started building her fence 3 feet over on my property. I had her stop and remove the fence. She was angry and never rebuilt it. I painted my house. She painted her house, same color. I bought a new car. She bought a new car, same color, same configuration. There's other minor stuff, but that's enough. Odd person. Very odd. Live in a rural area too. Neighbor shot my husband's dog in our yard. The dude was on drugs, cheating on his heavily pregnant wife with another addict, just completely out of his mind. He didn't even show a bit of remorse. He set out cat food, doesn't have cats, so Scrappy would go to his porch. Chased him into our front yard, shot him in the ribs. He didn't die immediately. I could have strangled the dude right then and there, even as a little 110-pound female. It still infuriates me. Apartment building. The upstairs neighbor's dog peed on their patio and it dripped down onto me while I was sitting outside reading. I yelled and ran to shower, and when I texted them to ask them to take their dog out to pee in future, they said it wasn't their dog and it must have blown over from somewhere else. What?